Professor Matt Warshauer here today, and he's a professor at Central Connecticut State University, professor of history, and he is also in charge of the Connecticut Civil War Commemoration Commission, which is coordinating the anniversary celebrations here. It's the 150th anniversary of the Civil War this year throughout the entire state. So he is in charge of all that, and he's been doing an amazing job. And he also, as you know, recently came out with a new book, Connecticut and the American Civil War, Slavery, Sacrifice, and Survival, which he'll be talking about today, along with the commemoration plans for the state. And I want to remind everyone, if you haven't seen the exhibit next door, to come over after we finish up here. It's Letters from the Battlefield, Stories of Washington's Civil War Soldiers, and it's being generously funded by the Bacchus Foundation, and our associated programs are being funded by the Community Foundation of Northwest Connecticut. And we have a great lineup coming up for the summer and the fall. We have a Civil War document preservation workshop coming up, a Civil War band performance here in the Whipham Room. Abolitionist Abby Kelly is coming back to give a living history performance at the Congregational Church across the street. William Webb, a colored soldier from the 29th Connecticut, is going to also be doing a living history performance here. And finally, we're doing a Civil War themed cemetery tour 2 nights before Halloween this year. So there's a lot planned, and the exhibit will come down at the end of October, so spread the word to all your friends to come and take a look at it. So I hand it off to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. If you have not seen the exhibit, you've got to go walk through it. I just spent a little while walking through it. It's absolutely amazing, and trust me, I've been doing the rounds around the state on Civil War exhibits, and this one's really a gem. And I don't ever use that word. No, it really is. It's got this great mixture of very personal letters, but a lot of artifacts, and you can really get a sense of feel of the exhibit. It's really very, very wonderful. And what's great to see with places like this is, when we created the Civil War Commemoration Committee and then Commission, what we were really hoping is that we could help to provide a kind of central organizing body to get people in touch with each other and get them motivated, and not have to be in the position of trying to micromanage anybody and saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that, and letting them really dive into their own collections and get excited and just basically run with it. And the neat thing about the Gunn is that before the commemorations planning ever got started, they were working on these transcription projects with kids who are transcribing soldiers' letters. And so, I mean, that program has really, in many ways, become a model for what other places in the state can do. And so, I mean, it's just, for me, it's fantastic to see a historical society museum like this that just grabs a hold of a subject and looks at it in so many different ways and allows, this window into a community. That to me is really, really cool. And because, one of the things I've been saying to a lot of people is that, when we think of the Civil War, we don't necessarily think of Connecticut. I mean, when we think of Connecticut history, we think of the American Revolution, really. And we have this revolutionary past. And in many, many ways, I think that Connecticut's Civil War history is deeper and richer than our American Revolutionary history. And it's not that we don't have an important Revolutionary War history. We absolutely do. But there's just so much going on during the Civil War period. And it's such a controversial time period. And the state becomes so mobilized, and there's so much Union sentiment and anti-Union sentiment all within the state that it really is pretty remarkable and very, very fascinating. And then when you think about the number of monuments that exist in the state, over 130 Civil War monuments in the state of Connecticut, one of which in Kensington is the oldest Civil War monument in the entire North, dedicated in July of 1863. And so, there are more monuments to the Civil War than any other type of monument in the state of Connecticut. And it tells you something about the nature of what this rather large conflict was. And, I've been joking lately and saying that when I first started working with people at Commission on Culture and Tourism about doing something on Connecticut and the Civil War there, tourism director, Randy Fivish, is from Georgia. And when I first started talking to him 2 years ago about this, he didn't really say anything because we didn't know each other that well. But I've gotten to know him pretty well, and about 2 months ago, he said to me with all candor, he goes, you know, when you first started talking about Connecticut and the Civil War, I had to chuckle. Because, you know, he's from Georgia. He's grown up amidst these legends of the lost cause and Civil War. And so he's like, I really didn't take it seriously. And now he's become very, very interested in the kind of the other side of the story that he had never really known and how involved Connecticut is. So, you know, what I'd like to do tonight, if you'll indulge me a little bit, is you know, every play, I've been giving a lot of talks over the last couple of months, and I always try and do something a little different at every single one of them and tie it to a community or do something different. But, you know, I thought about what I wanted to do at this one for a while, because the last time that I came up was, I came for Walt Powell's talk. And I will say he had, you know, a lot more people in his talk than I had. So, yeah, he had better weather, and it was a weekend, and, you know. I am hurt, though. I'm personally hurt. But one of the things during the question and answer period, one of the things that the audience really seemed interested in was engaging issues of constitutionality and of the nature of the war and whether the war should have been fought and whether the South had the right to secede. And it's not something at Civil War lectures that you're always going to get very often. So if you'll indulge me, I thought we might go there a little bit today and talk about, rather than, you know, kind of the big picture of the war and of Connecticut, and talk a little bit about the idea of secession. And this is also to intrigue my wife, because she's been going to all of these talks, and I'm constantly trying to get her to think, wow, he talked about something I didn't know about, because I don't want her to get bored. So, but what's interesting about talking about the very nature of secession and the question of constitutionality when it comes to secession is it is very much connected to Connecticut's Civil War story. Because, I mean, there's two primary things that I like people to come away with from these talks that they don't necessarily know about Connecticut. One is that we were not an abolitionist Mecca. I mean, a lot of people have internalized this idea that we were all abolitionists. Washington, really, and Frederick Gunn, he was an abolitionist. Washington probably had more abolitionists than most places in the state. We are not, you know, abolitionists during this time in Connecticut are viewed as absolute fanatics. They're viewed as dangerous. They're viewed as causing the war because they keep agitating this issue of slavery, and most people believe it should just be left alone. That slavery is protected by the Constitution, and that's that. And it is. And so that's one thing. The other thing that people have a tendency to believe is that Connecticut is, you know, again, northern New England state, that Connecticut is wholly united in this struggle. And that once Fort Sumter is fired upon, everyone, you know, walks out of their home or their business, and they go and line up, and they join a regiment, and off they go to fight the war. And that, you know, American flags are flying everywhere, and Connecticut is wholly united in this struggle. And again, nothing could be further from the truth. As much as we are not an abolitionist Mecca, we are not wholly united in this struggle. There are about 55,000 men from Connecticut who go forward in the war. It's about 10 to 12% of the population. We put together 29 regiments. The 29th is the colored regiment. We have cavalry regiments. We have, in addition to the 29, we have some cavalry regiments. We have light artillery, heavy artillery regiments. So we send a lot of guys to war. And you hear that 10 to 12% number, and you go, well, that's a lot. When you actually break it down for the number of men between the ages of 15 and 50, which is actually still a broad spectrum, I think broader than what it should be, but, you know, for census reasons, you got to kind of open it up. 47% of the population goes to war. That's huge. We've never seen a mobilization like that before. But the interesting thing is that 47%, there was at least 40 to 45, maybe more percent that opposed the war, and really opposed the war. After the firing on Fort Sumter, you get as many men who go and, Connecticut, it's requested to put together, Lincoln calls for 75,000 troops, and Connecticut is requested to put together 1 regiment. That's our share of it. We put together 3 regiments like that. We fill them up. A regiment has around 800 men in it, give or take a few. And we put together 3 regiments. And that without question, shows serious commitment to the Union. But as much as there are people raising the American flag and recruiting and having, bands and music, and there are people who are going out in the street and opposing all of this. And there's no, I've said this to a lot of people, there's no one specific locale for anti-war sentiment. It's not rural or urban. It's not in the western part of the state or the eastern part of the state. It's not in the New Haven region or in the Hartford region. It's all over the place. Newspapers all over Connecticut report the raising of peace flags. And what peace flags are they are either a white flag or they are a South Carolina palmetto flag. And these groups, and many of them are torn down right away. But the fact that they're raised, and in some places they're raised and people go to take them down and fist fights start, or mob riots start, or people are getting shot over this stuff. So there really is a lot of tremendous anti-war animosity over this conflict. And, I gave a talk at the Connecticut State Library a couple of weeks ago at the Museum of Connecticut History. And if you've been to the Capitol building, or across the street in the museum, and you've gone in there and they have all the portraits of the governors on the walls there. And so I talked about the Civil War from the perspective of the portraits of the governors, because there's 2 governors in particular that are on those walls. I talked about the Great Wall of Dead White Men on either side. But if you look at 2 of those specific gubernatorial portraits and tell the stories, so often we go in, we see a portrait like that, and we go, oh, that's nice. And then we move along. But then if you actually go behind the picture, behind the portrait a little bit, you can tell a tremendous history from these images. And you can tell from looking at the portrait of Governor Buckingham and looking at the portrait of Governor Thomas Seymour, and the history of both of these men, they absolutely define Connecticut's experience during the Civil War.